In July of 1955, Betty Crocker printed a recipe for a cold cherry mold that cost less than $1 and fed 10 people at a backyard cookout. Women clipped it from the back of a General Mills package and made it every 4th of July for the next 20 years. You will not find it in a single food magazine today. Number 19 on this list was so popular during the Eisenhower era that Betty Crocker featured a variation of it 3 summers in a row. And it takes 11 minutes. Before we get started, hit subscribe, because this list goes places the Betty Crocker website does not. Let us count down 25 forgotten 4th of July recipes that deserve to come back. Number 25. Perfection salad. Before coleslaw came in a bag and pasta salad came in a deli tub, there was perfection salad. Betty Crocker featured it in her 1950s editions as the crown jewel of the church potluck table. It was a gelatin mold, lime or lemon jello mixed with shredded cabbage, carrots, celery, and cider vinegar, chilled overnight in a loaf pan and unmolded onto a platter lined with lettuce leaves. It sounds strange to modern ears. It was not strange in 1957. It was elegant. Gelatin salad solved a real problem for the 4th of July hostess. She could make it the night before, keep it cold, and it held its shape on a picnic table in the July heat far longer than anything dressed in mayonnaise. A box of Jell-O cost about 10 cents. The vegetables came from the garden. The whole dish cost less than 30 cents and fed 12 people. Women competed over whose mold held together the longest and whose shredded vegetables were cut the finest. It was a point of pride. The backlash came in the 1980s when food writers began mocking gelatin salads as the relic of a less sophisticated era. Cooking magazines declared them embarrassing. Home cooks who had been making them for 30 years quietly stopped. Within a generation, perfection salad had become a punchline instead of a point of pride, and the potluck table got worse for it. 24. Old-fashioned lemonade cake. Not the box mix, not the lemon pudding version from the 1990s. The original Betty Crocker lemonade cake was a white butter cake, soaked while still warm with a syrup made from fresh lemon juice and sugar, then frosted with a simple lemon glaze that dried to a thin, crackled shell. The lemon-soaking syrup was the trick. It pulled the cake slightly apart, opened up the crumb, and let the tartness soak all the way through, so every bite hit sweet and sour at the same time. In the 1950s and 1960s, a 4th of July cake had to survive the trip to the park and the heat of the afternoon. Buttercream wilted, whipped cream collapsed. The lemon glaze on this cake sat firm and held all day. Women baked it Thursday night, glazed it Friday morning, and it was still perfect on Saturday afternoon. When grocery store bakeries began selling decorated sheet cakes by the square foot, the made-from-scratch lemonade cake started disappearing. Why spend 2 hours baking when you could pick up a cake on the way to the cookout? The answer, of course, is that the cake you pick up does not taste like lemons. It tastes like sugar and shortening and artificial flavoring. But by the time most families figured that out, nobody remembered what a real lemon cake tasted like. Number 23. Deviled eggs with paprika and pickle relish. Deviled eggs have not disappeared entirely, but the Betty Crocker version from the 1950s has. The filling was simple: yolks mashed with yellow mustard, sweet pickle relish, mayonnaise, a splash of cider vinegar, salt, and white pepper. They were topped with a dusting of paprika so heavy the eggs looked sunburned. That combination, the sweetness of the relish, the sharpness of the mustard, the acid from the vinegar, was a calculated balance that modern deviled egg recipes keep trying to improve on with sriracha, bacon crumbles, and truffle oil. They have not improved it. They have just made it more expensive. A dozen eggs cost about 60 cents in 1958. The relish and mustard were already in every icebox in America. The whole platter cost less than $1 and held 24 halves. Every woman at every 4th of July cookout had a deviled egg plate, an oval dish with 12 indentations, usually a wedding gift used twice a year at most. Those plates are in antique stores now, $3 a piece, because nobody uses them anymore. We replaced the deviled egg with the store-bought veggie tray and called it healthier. Number 22. Icebox rolls. In 1953, Betty Crocker published a roll recipe that changed how American women thought about baking for a crowd. The dough was made the night before with flour, yeast, shortening, sugar, egg, and salt, and then stored in the refrigerator until morning. On the day of the cookout, you pulled the dough out, shaped the rolls, let them rise for an hour, and baked them. The icebox method was a revelation. It meant fresh, hot rolls at a 4th of July cookout without anyone standing in a hot kitchen at noon in July. The work was done the night before. The oven only had to run for 20 minutes the day of the party. Homemade rolls at a holiday cookout were a statement. They said the hostess cared. Guests who arrived and saw a basket of homemade rolls on the table felt welcomed in a way that a bag of hamburger buns from the grocery store could not replicate. Pillsbury crescent rolls in a cardboard tube killed the icebox roll in 1 decade. Fast, easy, and entirely without the flavor or texture of the real thing. Today, the idea of making rolls from scratch for a 4th of July party sounds like a burden. In 1955, it was simply what you did. Number 21. Macaroni salad with cooked dressing. Not the macaroni salad from a deli case. The Betty Crocker version used a cooked dressing, egg yolks, sugar, dry mustard, vinegar, and butter cooked together in a saucepan until thick, then cooled and folded into the pasta with celery, green pepper, and pimiento. The cooked dressing was sharper and lighter than mayonnaise. It dressed the pasta without making it heavy. On a hot July afternoon, this macaroni salad held up where the mayo version would have gone slick and greasy. Cooking a dressing from scratch takes about 10 minutes. In the 1950s, that was considered a basic kitchen skill. By the 1980s, jar mayonnaise had become so standard that the cooked dressing was considered an unnecessary complication. Today's macaroni salad is mostly mayonnaise with pasta. The Betty Crocker version was pasta with a dressing that actually had flavor built into it. The difference is not subtle once you have tasted both. Number 20. Watermelon rind pickles. Most households today throw away the rind of a watermelon without a second thought. In the 1950s and the 1960s, Betty Crocker's cookbooks included a full recipe for sweet-spiced watermelon rind pickles. The white inner rind peeled, cubed, brined overnight, then simmered with sugar, cider vinegar, cinnamon sticks, cloves, and allspice until translucent and syrupy. They took 2 days to make properly. They were sealed into jars and kept through the winter, and they were one of the most requested items on a 4th of July table. Sweet, spiced, cold, and nothing like any pickle a person had tasted before. The flavor was remarkable. The vinegar kept them sharp. The spices made them taste almost like Christmas in July. Served alongside pulled pork or cold sliced ham, they cut through the fat the way a condiment should. When grocery stores began stocking shelf after shelf of jarred pickles, the 2-day process of making watermelon rind pickles stopped making sense to most home cooks. Food preservation became a hobby instead of a necessity. Number 19. Pimiento cheese spread. Before pimiento cheese became a boutique product sold in small crocks at gourmet grocers for $9, it was a Betty Crocker staple. Sharp cheddar grated fine, mixed with mayonnaise, a pinch of cayenne, and a jar of diced pimientos mashed together until spreadable and served on white bread triangles at every summer gathering from Virginia to Texas. It cost almost nothing. A block of sharp cheddar, a jar of pimientos, and enough mayonnaise to bind it. Mothers made it the night before, covered it with wax paper, and kept it in the icebox. By the next day, the flavors had settled, and it was better cold than it had been warm. Cut into triangles, arranged on a plate, pimiento cheese sandwiches were the food that kept children fed, while adults stood around the grill waiting for the hamburgers. It has not disappeared entirely. The South kept it. But the Betty Crocker version, simple and made from 3 ingredients, has been replaced by artisan versions with smoked paprika, cream cheese, and roasted garlic that cost more and taste like something trying too hard to be impressive. Number 18. Red, white, and blue Jell-O mold. This one was not just a recipe, it was a project. Betty Crocker published variations throughout the 1950s and the 1960s, and it showed up in every holiday issue of every women's magazine from 1952 to 1976. 3 layers. Strawberry gelatin on the bottom, allowed to set firm. A middle layer of cream cheese or sour cream, whipped with unflavored gelatin until it turned pale and cloud-like. Blueberry or grape gelatin on top. Chilled overnight so the layers stayed distinct. Unmolded onto a platter and carried to the table like a trophy. It took 3 separate pours and 3 separate chill times. Women started it on July 3rd. The patience required was not incidental. It was the point. When it unmolded cleanly onto the plate and the 3 layers appeared in perfect red, white, and blue, the room reacted. It was the most visually patriotic dish on the table, made entirely from pantry staples by a woman who planned ahead. Instant desserts killed it. When pudding cups and no-bake cheesecakes arrived, the idea of a dessert that required 3 separate steps over 2 days stopped making sense to most home cooks. We lost a little patience and a lot of beauty when we stopped making it. Number 17. Old-fashioned baked beans. Not the can. Betty Crocker's baked beans started with dry navy beans soaked overnight, then slow-cooked for hours with salt pork, molasses, dry mustard, onion, and brown sugar until the liquid reduced to a dark, thick, lacquered glaze. The beans went into a heavy pot Friday night and came out Saturday morning. All they needed between those 2 points was the oven set to 300 degrees and a single check around midnight. The molasses gave them a depth that no canned product has ever replicated. The salt pork melted through the beans over 8 hours in a way that no added bacon at the end of the cooking time can match. At a 4th of July cookout, these beans sat beside the grill in a cast iron pot, and people helped themselves all afternoon. They were better at room temperature than hot. They were better the next day than they had been the day they were made. Canned beans replaced them because the result was close enough, and the time saved was significant. The problem is, close enough is not the same as right. Anyone who has eaten both knows the difference. Number 16. Cucumber and onion salad in sweet vinegar dressing. No mayonnaise. No sour cream. Betty Crocker's cucumber salad was sliced cucumbers and thin-cut sweet onions soaked in a dressing of white vinegar, sugar, salt, and a little water until the vegetables turned slightly translucent and the dressing tasted both sharp and sweet at the same time. It required nothing but time and a sharp knife. Made in the morning, the cucumbers and onions pulled liquid, and the dressing became something more than the sum of its parts by afternoon. On a July afternoon, nothing on the cookout table was more refreshing. The cucumbers stayed cold even when the potato salad was getting warm. The sharp sweetness of the dressing cut through the char of grilled meat the way a cold drink cuts through heat. Cucumbers came from the garden. Onions were always in the house. The vinegar and sugar cost cents. It disappeared because food culture moved toward cream-based salads, and the sharp simplicity of a vinegar dressing began to seem old-fashioned rather than perfect. It was perfect. Number 15. Potato salad with hot bacon dressing. This is not the potato salad most people picture. Betty Crocker's German-style hot potato salad skipped the mayonnaise entirely. Boiled red potatoes, sliced while still warm, were dressed with a hot pan sauce of rendered bacon, cider vinegar, sugar, mustard, and the bacon drippings themselves, then finished with sliced green onions and parsley. The potatoes absorbed the dressing while warm, which meant the flavor went all the way through instead of sitting on the surface. Hot potato salad solved the 4th of July food safety problem that nobody talked about in polite company. Mayonnaise-based potato salad sitting in the sun for 3 hours on a July afternoon. Hot bacon dressing did not spoil. It did not need to be kept cold. It could sit on the table all afternoon and still be safe to eat at 5 o'clock. Betty Crocker knew what she was doing. The recipe was practical, and the result was better than anything the convenience food era offered as a replacement. When deli-case potato salad became available year-round for about the same price as making it at home, most families stopped making it from scratch altogether. They got convenience. Number 14. Strawberry shortcake with real biscuits. Not the grocery store sponge cups. Not the angel food cake version. Betty Crocker's strawberry shortcake was built on a proper biscuit, butter, flour, cream, a little sugar. Baked until the top cracked and the inside steamed. Split open while hot, layered with sugared strawberries that had been sitting long enough to draw their own syrup, and finished with real whipped cream. The biscuit was the whole argument. Warm and slightly salty against the cold macerated berries and the barely sweet cream. No combination since has improved on it. Strawberry season and the 4th of July overlapped perfectly. Families in the South and Midwest picked strawberries in late June. By the holiday, the last of the season's fruit was at its sweetest. A shortcake made from fresh, picked strawberries, dressed with a spoonful of sugar and left to sit for 2 hours, was already perfect before the biscuit and cream arrived. The grocery store version, sponge cups from a cellophane package, showed up in the 1970s and solved the labor problem by eliminating everything that made shortcake worth eating. Today, most Americans have never tasted the real version and do not know they are missing it. Number 13. Tomato aspic. Cold, set tomato juice mixed with celery, green olives, and onion in an unflavored gelatin base, molded in a ring pan and unmolded onto a platter of shredded iceberg lettuce, then dressed with mayonnaise thinned with a little lemon juice. It sounds unappealing until you understand what it was for. In the heat of July, a cold, savory dish that required no last-minute preparation and held its shape on the table was more practical than almost anything else on the cookout menu. Betty Crocker published tomato aspic in multiple editions throughout the 1950s and the 1960s. It appeared on more holiday tables than most people would believe. The flavor was deeply savory: tomato, celery salt, a little Worcestershire, served cold from the refrigerator. Beside a plate of cold sliced ham and a bowl of baked beans, it was a perfect counterpoint. Aspic required confidence. You had to trust the gelatin ratio, trust the flavor balance, and trust that unmolding a ring pan in front of a table full of guests was going to work. When it did, it was one of the most impressive things a home cook could produce with pantry ingredients. When food culture decided that anything with the word gelatin on the label was embarrassing, tomato aspic disappeared inside a single decade. An entire category of practical, elegant, make-ahead food vanished because it looked old-fashioned to people who had forgotten why it was invented. Number 12. Homemade lemonade with lemon ice ring. Betty Crocker's party lemonade was not made from a can of frozen concentrate. It started with actual lemons, juiced, the zest set aside. The juice mixed with a simple syrup of sugar and water that had been cooked and cooled, then poured over a ring of ice made from lemonade itself, so the punch bowl never became watered down. The lemon ice ring was the trick that separated the hostess who planned from the hostess who did not. Frozen in a bundt pan the night before and floated in the punch bowl the day of the party, it kept the lemonade cold for hours and made the bowl look like something worth looking at. The whole setup cost less than $1 in 1958. Lemons ran about 30 cents a dozen. Sugar was 4 cents a pound. The effort was 30 minutes the night before. Powdered lemonade mix arrived in the early 1960s and solved the 30-minute problem by replacing it with a product that tasted like lemon-scented dish soap, sweetened with corn syrup. Americans accepted the trade because convenience had already become its own argument. A punch bowl of homemade lemonade with a floating lemon ice ring told your guests something specific. You thought about them yesterday. A pitcher of country time tells them you thought about them when you grabbed it off the shelf. Number 11. Deviled crab cakes. This is not a coastal recipe. Betty Crocker's deviled crab appeared in mainstream mid-century cookbooks as a 4th of July party dish for families nowhere near the ocean. Made with canned crab meat, blue crab packed in tins, shelf-stable, affordable, and available at every grocery store in the country. Mixed with dry mustard, Worcestershire sauce, a little cayenne, egg, and just enough cracker crumbs to bind, formed into cakes, and pan-fried in butter until golden and crusted. The dry mustard and cayenne were the point. They deviled the crab the same way they deviled an egg. A can of crab in 1960 cost about 40 cents. One can made 6 cakes. Served alongside sliced tomatoes and a cold cucumber salad, this was a 4th of July party dish that required no grill and produced no smoke. It disappeared because canned crab became expensive and fresh crab became the reference point. When the inexpensive version was priced out of reach and the recipe remained built around a budget ingredient, the dish lost its logic. Today, a crab cake is a restaurant item. In 1960, it was a home-cook item that cost 60 cents to make for the whole table. That shift from everyday to special occasion is how most of the food on this list disappeared. Number 10. Creamed peas on toast points. Frozen peas thawed and folded into a white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, seasoned with salt and white pepper, and ladled over triangles of toasted white bread with the crusts removed. In the 1950s, frozen peas were a luxury. They had arrived in American freezers only recently, and Betty Crocker promoted them heavily as the modern housewife's best tool. Creamed peas on toast was her way of making a freezer staple into a party dish. For the 4th of July, it was the dish that fed children without complaint and gave adults something elegant to put on a plate beside cold sliced chicken. It looked more refined than it was. The white sauce was basic. The peas required nothing beyond thawing. The toast points took 5 minutes. The dish belonged to an era when white sauce was a fundamental skill, and the freezer was still something worth impressing guests with. Both of those things stopped being true at roughly the same time, and creamed peas on toast left with them. Number 9. Old-fashioned fruit punch with ginger ale. Before 2-liter bottles existed, party punch was built from scratch. Betty Crocker's fruit punch started with a base of strong brewed tea, cooled and combined with frozen lemonade concentrate, frozen orange juice, and crushed pineapple, then finished at serving time with cold ginger ale poured over ice. The ginger ale was added at the last minute, so the carbonation was still alive when it hit the glass. The tea gave the punch a depth that juice alone could not provide. The pineapple floated in the bowl and made it look abundant. Made in a large punch bowl and served with a ladle, this punch was the centerpiece of the drink table. Children drank it by the cup. Adults spiked theirs privately and said nothing. A batch cost about $2 in 1962 and served 30 people. The 2-liter bottle made punch obsolete in one move. Why spend 30 minutes building a punch bowl when you could set 2 2-liter bottles on the table and call it done? The answer, as always, is that what you put in the glass tastes like something you built instead of something you bought. Number 8. Layered ribbon sandwiches. Betty Crocker's party sandwich loaf was the most ambitious cold dish in the mid-century American hostess's repertoire. A full loaf of white sandwich bread, with the crusts removed, sliced horizontally into 4 even layers. Each layer was spread with a different filling: egg salad, pimiento cheese, ham salad, cucumber, and cream cheese. The loaf was then reassembled, frosted on the outside with cream cheese thinned to spreading consistency with a little cream, and decorated with sliced olives and radish roses. Refrigerated overnight and sliced at the table, it revealed the striped layers inside and produced a sound in the room that was half surprise and half admiration. It cost less than $3 to make, and it fed 12 people. The labor was about 90 minutes, spread across 2 evenings. This was the dish that women brought to 4th of July parties when they wanted to be remembered. Not the one who brought store-bought chips, not the one who brought a deli tray, the one who brought the sandwich loaf. Food cultures shift away from anything requiring sustained effort, planning, and presentation made the sandwich loaf impossible to justify in a world that measured cooking success by speed. We stopped rewarding the women who stayed up late making ribbon sandwiches and started rewarding the stores that sold everything pre-made. The women adjusted accordingly. We all lost something. Number 7. Chilled cucumber soup. No stove required. No heat whatsoever. This is the 4th of July recipe that Betty Crocker published as the solution to cooking in summer. A cold soup made from peeled cucumbers blended with sour cream, chicken broth, a clove of garlic, a handful of fresh dill, and lemon juice. Then refrigerated for at least 4 hours until it was almost as cold as the bowl it was served in. Poured into cups and handed to guests as they arrived. It was the kind of thing that stopped conversation for a moment while everyone registered how good it was and how unexpected. Cold soup seems like a restaurant concept. It was not. It was a practical answer to the question every woman asked in July. How do I feed people without standing over a stove in 90-degree weather? Betty Crocker's answer was already in the refrigerator. Make something cold the night before and let the ice box do the cooking. The dish required a blender, a refrigerator, and cucumbers, all things American home kitchens had by 1960. It required no special skill and produced results that impressed people who expected the host to have worked harder. It disappeared because cold soup never fully made sense to Americans as a category. We understood hot soup, we understood cold drinks. Something in between felt like an error. The dish paid the price for our narrow thinking. Number 6. Skillet cornbread with cracklins. Not the muffin tin version, not the sweet cornbread from a box mix. Betty Crocker's Southern-style skillet cornbread was poured into a cast-iron skillet that had been heating in the oven with a film of bacon drippings in the bottom. The batter hit the hot iron and the bottom crust formed in seconds before the bread even began to bake. Cracklins were the small, crisp bits of rendered pork fat folded into the batter. They disappeared into the bread as it baked and left behind pockets of savory, smoky flavor in every slice. Turned out of the skillet onto a cutting board and cut into wedges, it was still hot when it arrived on the 4th of July table. The bottom was almost black and crackled when you pressed it. The inside was dense and tender and smelled like a wood-burning stove. No bag of cornbread mix produces that result. The skillet is part of the recipe. The drippings in the hot pan are part of the recipe. The cracklins are part of the recipe. Remove any of those and you have cornbread. Keep them and you have something else. Cast iron cookware required maintenance, care, and knowledge. As families moved from houses with kitchen storage to apartments with galley kitchens, the heavy skillet stayed behind, and the recipe went with it. Number 5. Homemade vanilla ice cream in a hand-cranked freezer. Betty Crocker published hand-cranked ice cream recipes throughout the 1950s, not as nostalgia, but as current practice. Electric ice cream makers existed, but they were expensive. The hand-cranked wooden bucket with a metal canister surrounded by rock salt and ice was the tool most American families owned. The custard base was egg yolks, sugar, cream, and real vanilla. It was cooked together on the stove, cooled completely, then poured into the canister and turned. Children cranked in shifts. Adults took over when the resistance increased as the ice cream thickened. The whole process took about 45 minutes from setup to the moment the lid came off and someone dipped in the first spoon. The ice cream that came out was not the same product sold in cartons. The fat content of heavy cream, the richness of real egg yolks, and the time spent churning produced a texture that was simultaneously dense and light, a resistance to the spoon that store-bought ice cream has never replicated. Served in bowls on a 4th of July afternoon, still slightly soft from the freezer, it was the dessert everyone stood around waiting for. Electric ice cream makers eliminated the labor, but not the recipe. Then, store-bought ice cream eliminated the need to make it at all. Then, artificial vanilla and stabilizer gums changed what ice cream tasted like, and most people forgot what they had given up. 4. Cold cherry mold. In July of 1955, Betty Crocker printed this recipe on the back of a General Mills package. Women clipped it out and tucked it into their recipe boxes and made it every 4th of July for the next 20 years. It was a cherry gelatin mold. Dark, sweet cherries, either canned or fresh pitted, suspended in cherry jello with a little cream cheese whipped in to cloud the center layer and cut the sweetness. Set in a ring mold overnight, unmolded onto a plate of crushed ice to keep it cold at the table, and garnished with a few whole cherries on top. It cost less than $1 and fed 10 people. The cherries were the star. The gelatin was the vehicle that let you make it the night before and trust it would still be standing at 5 o'clock the next afternoon in July heat. There is a reason Betty Crocker kept coming back to gelatin molds for summer entertaining. She was solving a real problem. How does a home cook produce a dessert that looks impressive, travels without collapsing, holds up in heat, and costs almost nothing? The cold cherry mold answered every one of those questions. Food writers in the 1980s decided gelatin molds were the embarrassing artifact of a less sophisticated era. They were not sophisticated about it. They were wrong. The cold cherry mold was practical, beautiful, and delicious. 3 things that a pint of store-bought sorbet on a paper plate is not. It disappeared because we decided convenience was the same as progress. 3. Cold spaghetti salad. This one surprises people who did not grow up with it. Betty Crocker's cold spaghetti salad was cooked spaghetti, broken into thirds before boiling, tossed while still warm with Italian dressing, then chilled overnight and finished the next day with sliced black olives, diced green pepper, diced onion, cherry tomatoes, and a heavy shake of salad seasoning. The overnight rest was not optional. The pasta had to sit in the dressing long enough to absorb it. Spaghetti tossed with dressing and served immediately tastes like dressed pasta. Spaghetti that has sat overnight tastes like something else entirely. The noodles take on the herb and vinegar so completely that the dressing disappears into the dish. It was one of the most practical 4th of July recipes Betty Crocker ever published. Made the night before, served cold. No reheating, no last-minute assembly, no mayonnaise to worry about in the heat. A bowl of cold spaghetti salad could sit on a picnic table for 3 hours and be safe and delicious at the end of it. 2. Flag dessert pizza. A sugar cookie crust pressed into a round pizza pan and baked until just set. Not crisp, not browned, just barely done, so it stayed soft in the center. Cooled completely, then spread with a thick layer of cream cheese, sweetened with powdered sugar and a little vanilla. Strawberry slices arranged in rows across the top. Blueberries packed into the upper left corner to form the field of stars, served cold, cut into wedges at the table. It looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like. A flag, made of fruit, on a cookie. Betty Crocker published variations of this through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, and it showed up at 4th of July cookouts across the country for about a decade before it quietly faded out. It was the kind of recipe that spread through church cookbooks and neighborhood newsletters before the internet existed to carry it further. The genius of it was the same genius behind the poke cake at number 1. No decorating skill required. You did not need a pastry bag or a steady hand. 1 red, white, and blue poke cake. Most people think the poke cake is a 1970s invention. It is. But the version that appeared on 4th of July tables from about 1974 through the mid-1980s, the one Betty Crocker actively promoted, was something specific and intentional, and it is not the same cake showing up on food blogs today. A white cake baked in a 9x13 pan, cooled completely, then poked across the entire surface with the handle of a wooden spoon. Strawberry jello dissolved in boiling water and poured over the top, soaking down into every hole. Blueberry jello dissolved separately and poured in a second pass. The whole pan refrigerated for 4 hours until the gelatin set inside the cake. Finished with a thick layer of Cool Whip spread to the edges and served cold, straight from the pan. Sliced and lifted out, each piece showed red and blue streaks running through white cake under white topping. The colors were inside the cake, not on it. That was the point. Betty Crocker knew exactly what she was doing when she published this. It was patriotic, make-ahead, and required no decorating skill whatsoever. A woman who could not write Happy 4th of July in frosting could still produce a cake that looked festive and tasted like a celebration. The poke cake also solved the July heat problem that killed buttercream and whipped cream. Cool Whip held. What killed it was the same thing that killed everything else on this list. Food culture decided it was not serious enough. Gelatin in a cake. The families who made it every 4th of July were not being lazy. They were being smart. They were feeding 20 people on a budget, making something that looked like the holiday and tasted like summer, and getting it done the night before so they could enjoy the party. That was always the point. Betty Crocker knew it. The women who clipped her recipes knew it. We forgot it when we decided that impressive mattered more than good. These 25 recipes were 2 days of work and 4 cents worth of ingredients, and they were the most interesting thing on the table. They were the very dishes we didn't realize we would miss so much all these years later. Tell me in the comments which one you are going to try, and if your family still makes any of these on the 4th of July, tell me where you are from.